Start the prayers. Until I reach enlightenment, I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By accumulating merit and wisdom through generosity and the other perfections, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. Until I reach enlightenment, I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By accumulating merit and wisdom through generosity and the other perfections, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. Until I reach enlightenment, I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By accumulating merit and wisdom through generosity and the other perfections, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment and anger that hold some close and others distant. I pay homage to the Sublime Mother of the victorious ones of the three times, the inexpressible, inconceivable, and indescribable perfection of wisdom, which is unborn, unceasing, and of the nature of space, and which is the object of realization of the self-knowing primordial wisdom. Okay. All right. I finally got the material sorted out. That was a mess. If you've read it, I made such a mess of it. If you've read it, I got totally confused. But then this morning I sat down and I redid it, and I hope it's okay now. So you see, it's so easy to get confused. It's all about the different tenets, the different tenet schools and their assertions. Now maybe I've gone a little bit. I've gone over the top. That is, it was maybe too extreme, all the details I gave. But every time I write it down, I'm thinking, oh, that would be helpful, and that would be helpful, and I end up adding a lot. Okay. Now, just to remind you where we got to. So we didn't really have any questions in the discussion group, and if they are, please ask again. But I want to get through the material a little bit more. Also, by the way, I forgot. I had page 197. Actually, it's 200. I gave you material up till 200, but I forgot to adjust the page numbers. Never mind, I'll do that later. Just in case you wonder, you have 200 pages, but it only says 197. And there's a little more, that 20 more, but I don't even know. I don't think we'd be able to cover all of them, so never mind. Next time. I'll give you a little bit more material. We have 3 more classes. Oh, I wanted to say that. We've got 3 more classes. So today, Saturday, Tuesday, Thursday. That's it. So then, Venerable Genzin Hamona, please sit. Oh, okay. All right. So we've got, 3 more classes, and then the module is complete. We've had, how many classes? 24? 12 for each module, and the term is complete. Okay, and we continue, of course, in autumn, if there's anyone left. Let's see. All right. Okay, so just to remind you, we've had that whole discussion about what role do the 16 aspects of the Four Noble Truths play. Of course, as we know by now, in the lower schools, other than the Prasangika school, they're essential because they're the main object of meditation of hearers and solitary realizers. In other words, in order to become liberated, only liberated, you need to realize those. That's what they assert. While the Prasangika school insists on intrinsic existence, insists on realizing the lack of intrinsic existence, realizing emptiness in general and the lack of intrinsic existence in particular. However, that doesn't mean, Acharya Chandrakirti argues, that the 16 aspects of the Four Noble Truths aren't important. Of course they're important. They need to be understood, but they're not enough. So then someone may wonder, well, why did the Buddha say so? The Buddha keeps saying, you need to realize the 16 aspects. He taught it in so many different sutras. Therefore, the question is, why did he teach it if it's not the correct, it's not correct in that sense? And Lama Tsongkhapa answers, well, it's a provisional teaching. It's interpretative. Of course, the 16 aspects, the way the Buddha taught them are important. We can accept them the way he taught them. But what is interpretative or what is provisional is the fact that these need to be realized, but those are not the main object of realization of someone to attain liberation, right? So if you go into the teachings on provisional and interpretative teachings, then you ask, what is the purpose for saying so? What is the contradiction if you accept this? Aspects that you go through, like what's the need for saying that? Why did the Buddha say this? What was the purpose for the Buddha saying so? And what contradicts that? I mean, what kind of contradictory factors or what counteracts that, since it's not literally correct? Anyway, we don't need to go into those. We've already talked about why there is a purpose or what the purpose may be. Anyway, so at this point now, here where we got to now, Lama Tsongkhapa says, well, I'll give you an example. Usually the example is a little easier than that which it exemplifies. Here it seems even more difficult. But I suppose his disciples, who he wrote the text for, principally, who he chiefly wrote the text to, they were probably very familiar with the Chittamatra school, and so no problem. But also that's kind of the teaching style that sometimes an analogy is used that may be really difficult, but it teaches something else. So here we're introduced to the Chittamatra school. So far I don't remember. No, I don't think Lama Tsongkhapa mentioned them so far. Okay, so let's look again at page 185. We already did that, so I'm not going to read through Lama Tsongkhapa's text, but just the explanation. So to clarify this point, Lama Tsongkhapa cites the Chittamatra system. So 185, just underneath the writing in bold and italic letters, which is illuminating the intent. So to clarify this point, Lama Tsongkhapa cites the Chittamatra system as an example here for what I just said. According to Acharya Chandrakirti's tradition, certain Chittamatra assertions can indeed be established through valid cognition, which is another way of saying, I could have maybe said that, can indeed be accepted. There are certain Chittamatra assertions that even the Prasangika school asserts. All the other Madhyamikas, they assert. So, similar to what is taught in the Abhidharma system. Now, the view that I explained to you earlier with the 16 aspects, that is particularly taught in the Abhidharma school, in the Abhidharma literature. How many Abhidharma texts are there? Two main ones, right? Which ones are they? Vasubandhu's Treasury of Knowledge or Abhidharma Kosha, and Arya Asanga's Compendium of Abhidharma. Yeah, those are the two main texts used in the Tibetan tradition. But anyway, so in those two traditions in particular, of course, they describe these 16 aspects, but they can be accepted. They're accepted. So that part is accepted, but the part that they're enough to become liberated, that part cannot be accepted. Similarly, in the Chittamatra school, you have certain explanations that can be accepted and others that cannot. Okay, so what are these three that can be accepted the way they are taught in the Chittamatra school? The refutation of partless particles, the refutation of externally existent objects composed of these particles, right? If you don't have partless particles, you also don't have externally existent objects composed of them, and the refutation of the assertion that such objects and the consciousness apprehending them are substantially different entities. Okay, so this means that both the Chittamatra and the Madhyamika schools, and let's not forget there's quite a few of the Madhyamika schools, they agree that partless particles do not exist, and consequently that there are no externally existent objects composed of such particles. So they all three of them agree. Oh, two of them. I mean, two means like Chittamatra and Madhyamika. They also agree that an externally existent object composed of such particles and the consciousness apprehending it are not substantially different entities. But the reasons for their assertions differ somewhat. So they're a little different. And this gave me the opportunity to explain what the difference is. Okay, so regarding the Chittamatrans, now we focus on the Chittamatrans. They reject partless particles. Why? That's really important. Why? Because they don't exist external existence. It's like, so what? It seems totally unrelated, right? Don't accept those external phenomena. What does that have to do? You could just accept partless particles, but they don't exist externally. Just as they say, for instance, a table exists. So don't get me wrong, or don't get it wrong. Like the Chittamatra school, what's really important is that when they say there's no external existence, they don't say that there's nothing other than my own mind. So like outside of my mind, namely your mind, doesn't exist. That's not what this means at all. It mustn't be misunderstood. What it means is material objects existing outside of the mind. That is impossible. So they really focus on physical objects, material objects. I used the word material here. I could have used physical as well. Maybe physical would have been better.
Atomically established, same or not same?
Yeah, exactly. Matter. That's kind of like matter. Atomic. But I do think they probably accept atoms, but not partless atoms, not partless particles. Yes. So why would they not? Yeah, they do talk about matter, unless I get something terribly wrong. But no, as far as I remember, they do accept a vase. Of course, it's matter, but they don't accept partless particles. Once again, when they say there's no external existence, we right away think of our own mind and external to that mind, other minds. That's not at all what they're saying. They're saying there's no external world, like a physical world outside of our own mind. So maybe I make some adjustments. Instead of saying material objects, I'm going to use physical. But never mind. So, okay, so why not? That's important. Regarding the Chittamatrans, they reject partless particles because they deny the objects appearing to the sense consciousnesses. They deny that the objects appearing to the sense consciousnesses exist external to those awarenesses. So sense objects appearing to the sense consciousnesses. So here already you get a hint. It's in particular sense objects. Although they accept the existence of material objects, so physical objects, they do not accept that such objects exist as external entities independent of consciousness. All right, that's pretty clear. Different to the Vaibhashika and Sautrantrika. Okay. Partless particles are asserted by other Buddhist schools, namely, the Vaibhashika and Sautrantrika, so they accept partless particles. And they say that these partless particles are the most fundamental building blocks of externally existent material objects. Right? So you may remember that I said, I think last time, that we have a tendency, and that is sometimes reflected in some of the particularly lower schools, that there is some stable basis. We want stability. We want stability. We want an intrinsic I. We want inherent existence. I mean, when I say we want, I say naturally we crave stability, don't we? We really crave stability. So impermanence is not really giving us that sense of, which is why, so that sense of stability expresses itself in some of the philosophical views, like an underlying permanent entity. For instance, God as a permanent entity gives stability. Even the world is not there all the time, even though things are changing, but God is always there. Or, I don't know, the sun, the moon, Or there's like a fundamental basis that is permanent and everything arises from this. Or they're partless particles, right? So they're the smallest building blocks, but they cannot be divided endlessly as logically, as would make sense. I mean, just logically, it makes sense. But just the sense, yes, they're the smallest, and we know the smallest, it doesn't get any smaller, and on the basis of that, everything bigger, or okay, that kind of sense. If such particles existed, they would provide an independently existing material for those objects, right? If they existed, if partless particles were to exist, what would they depend on? They didn't have to depend on parts because they don't have any parts. So they would be more real, in quotation marks, they would be more real than other things. Just more, basically, if they didn't have parts, hypothetically, they wouldn't depend on anything. Certainly don't have to depend on the mind. They just are. Okay?
Why?
So, pardon?
Why?
Why
can't they depend on the mind?
Why would they depend on the mind? Why would they have to depend on the mind? I mean, they exist without parts. They don't even need parts to depend. So the very least that I depend on, like, let's look at ourselves. If I ask you, what do you consist of? What do you depend on? You say body and mind. Causes and conditions, maybe. Merely labeled, no. But body and mind, absolutely. It's the last thing we want to let go of, the body, right? That's like our most important aspect we depend on. So therefore, logically anyway, if something doesn't depend on parts, why would it depend on anything else? If it doesn't depend on the most obvious thing, obvious in the sense it's physical parts, for instance, why would it depend on anything else? There's no reason for why, right? And anyway, the whole philosophical systems of the lower, like that's by Vaibhashika and Sautrantika, they pretty much accept, they don't say the self exists the way it appears to us. Sure, we've heard that many times now. Don't accept the coarse kind of self, so no self-sufficient, substantially existent self. But they don't touch external phenomena at all in their philosophy. Yeah, impermanent, okay, that part they definitely they definitely accept. But nothing of like, don't exist objectively, no way. And so partless particles works really well with their assertion. Okay. If such particles existed, they would provide an independently existing material basis for these objects, thereby establishing them as objective entities existing independently of consciousness. Since the Chittamatrans reject the existence of externally existent material objects, they likewise reject partless particles that are set to constitute them. That are set to constitute them. So now we're on page 186, right? No independent phenomenon out there objectively existent, no partless particle. That's their assertion. Okay. For the followers of the Chittamatra school, accepting such particles, if they were to accept such particles, it would amount to accepting an independently existing material foundation, kind of a foundation underlying the physical world. Right? Something really true out there, does its own thing, doesn't need anything else, which would contradict their assertion that material objects do not exist independent of or external to consciousness. So for them to exist dependently on the mind means to exist not external to the mind. The Prasangika school, of course, accepts that phenomena exist dependent on the mind, but not in that extreme way of saying they exist in the nature of the mind. See the difference? So it's a nice idea, yeah, dependent on the mind, so everything exists within the mind. But no, I mean, the Prasangika school goes all the way saying, yes, dependent on the mind, but still externally existent, which seems more difficult, right? When we hear something doesn't exist objectively, so it only exists subjectively, that seems to be the first thing that comes to mind is possibly, oh, exist only in the mind. But as I said, the high school would say, no, it's not like that. Anyway, but this establishes why the Chittamatra school does not accept does not accept partless particles, because otherwise, how would that work?
Can you talk about this more?
Pardon?
Like, why can't they accept just partless particles with rise due to the imprints?
Why could they not accept partless particles that would arise from the imprints? I mean, let's look at, okay, Chittamatra not as a school that form in India. Maybe they have. What we're here, we're not studying historical Chittamatrans. That's very important. We're not studying the historical Chittamatra school, although they have existed and historically they definitely held this view. But let's not forget, we're studying this for pedagogical reasons, for us to better understand. For us, after having studied, for instance, in the beginning, when you start studying, you start with the Tantrika school. Our studies in the very beginning, the preparatory studies, when we started to study philosophy, we started to learn how to debate first. Now we had a topic which is called collector topics, so different topics coming together. It's all from the Sutra school. Then came logic from the Sutra school. Then came specifically the preparation for logic. It had some Chittamatra aspects, but it didn't really come through, so it was mainly Sautrantrika. So Sautrantrika really was the first school we got to know. And we got used to this idea of this external world. No one ever denied that. For the first year or however long we studied those first topics, year and a half, we were very comfortable with like, the self, okay, doesn't exist the way it appears, but external phenomena do exist that way. Like the direct perception that we learned about, the mind that directly perceives the sense objects around us, unmistaken. Very different to the Prasangika school. No mistaken appearances. Don't worry, blue is blue and tree is a tree, and we see it for what it is. Right? You get used to that. And so also the idea of partless particles, it is mentioned. It's not, you don't go into it so much, but it's mentioned and it makes sense, right? It makes sense. And then you move to the Chittamatra school. So this idea of this stability that is out there, that is now taken away from you. And that includes these building blocks. I mean, actually, we never really think about this. We accept it. I mean, have you ever thought about that numbers are limitless? I mean, we think about it, but we're not emotionally. We're like, yeah, sure. But have you ever thought, oh my God, you can go endlessly, millions, trillions. We run out of words. We run out of terminology for all these numbers. Incredible. Both ways, plus and minus. So actually, on an emotional level, that's quite disconcerting. We like beginnings and ends. Again, that is part of our craving for stability. Clear lines. We like clear lines. We like beginnings and ends. And we like the smallest building blocks. We usually understand atoms, subatomic particles. I mean, usually most people know a little bit about the atoms. Subatomic particles, oh, so, okay, they exist, but no one really knows unless you study it in detail what it means. But still, it's like, okay, that's fine. I'm okay. There's some stability. There's subatomic particles. Okay. But that they can be divided endlessly, think about that. If you really went like for a day or two, you did a retreat on partless particles. No. On the endless parts of any particles that exists. If you were to do a retreat and I ask you to divide it as often as you can, you know, at some point you're like, oh my God, it goes on forever. How weird is that? Right? If you think about it, you can subdivide and subdivide and subdivide and subdivide it. So that sense of stability, is it still there after doing that for a few hours? No, right? Okay. So I think pedagogically, trying to move away from our sense of stability, we don't move right into partless particles, because the Chitta Matras just say they don't exist. They don't really go into the same explanation you find in the Madhyamika school, dividing them up and finding. No, they just kind of basically say nothing exists out there, so you can't have partless particles. So the focus is more on just the mind, just the mind, just the mind, right? And logically, it kind of makes sense. So I think it's more a pedagogical, that we stress this, it's more pedagogical than anything else. But not just that, actually, we should also remember that the Chittamatra school existed in India, the followers of the Chittamatra school. Their minds were very influenced by the views at that time, and that was definitely a view that if you have partless particles, then, phenomena have some kind of solidity or independence. And they saw that as contradictory. So I don't know whether every Chittamatra follower did see it that way. But as I said, what we're learning here is that which is pedagogically helpful for us. Okay. So, having said this, now let's move to the Madhyamika school. Oh, right, there's one more thing left. Also, for the followers of the Chittamatra school, sorry, that sentence, I'll read this sentence. Accepting such particles would amount to accepting an independently existing material foundation, underlying the physical world, which would contradict their assertion that material objects do not exist independent of, I read that already. Thus, although they accept the existence of material objects, they reject partless particles altogether. So they say no external material objects, but material objects, but no partless particles, whether external or not. Okay. Now, that's the Chittamatra. Now let's look at the Madhyamikas. They are divided into Svatantrika Madhyamikas and Prasangika Madhyamikas. I know you know that, but it's sometimes, our texts repeat that again and again. If it's a little complicated, they say it again and again. So why not, right? And saying, as you know, or as mentioned before, no, that's too cumbersome, no. So the Svatantrika Madhyamikas are further subdivided into Yogacara Svatantrika and Sautantrika Svatantrikas. Like the Chittamatrans, the Yogacara Svatantrika reject the existence of externally existing material objects. So they agree on that. You see that progression, right? It takes you from the Chittamatra to the Yogacara Svatantrika, still accept lack of external existence, but also having some views that the Chittamatra doesn't share with them. Then Sautantrika Svatantrika, that accepts the existence of external phenomena, and then Prasangika. Okay. Anyway, so like the Chittamatrans, the Yogacara Svatantrika reject the existence of externally existing material objects. Consequently, they also reject partless particles for the same reason, since the existence of such particles would imply an objective material reality external to consciousness. In this respect, they agree with the Chittamatrans. So they are the same. They're on the same, what's the word? They're on the same, never mind, they accept this level, or yeah. However, as Madhyamikas, the Yogacara Svatantrikas also reject partless particles for a further reason shared by all Madhyamika schools. What is that? That whatever exists must have parts. That is a view that's very much expounded by the Madhyamikas. I guess the Chittamatrans would have to say the same, but I suppose they talk about partless consciousness. Right, like consciousness. I don't think they talk about the consciousness can be divided endlessly. Yeah, probably not, because consciousness is so real and is so solid. So if that didn't have a solid foundation, if it can be divided endlessly, yeah, that's a question. Anyway, so never mind. Yeah, do you have a? Does anyone know? Can consciousness be endlessly divided, at least into moments in time? Yes. Do they accept that? I don't know. It would actually make sense that they don't, because they do accept the existence of consciousness to such a degree that, if they say the external phenomena don't exist because you can divide them endlessly, therefore they don't exist, that external, if they were to exist externally, that would mean you couldn't divide them endlessly. Then by that same reasoning, they would have to say, since consciousness exists as as more real. I don't know whether that's a good way of putting it, but that everything exists in the nature of consciousness, then you can't divide that endlessly.
What about different imprints right now? Is that not a...
Where does the endless dividing come in there?
that it's different parts of a consciousness?
There are different
I know
parts.
that imprints are not consciousness, but
They're kind of the same nature as consciousness. They're in the nature of consciousness. They're part of the consciousness. So they're part of the consciousness, but still there's no, you can divide an imprint endlessly. They never talk about that.
no, just the imprints being different and in that way part.
Ah, yeah, but
You know
no.
what I mean?
Oh, no, but that's not, we're talking about one particular thing and dividing it endlessly. So we're not talking about taking one imprint and dividing it endlessly. We just say they're limitless imprints. That's fine. But like what I'm saying is that they don't exist as particles because that suggests a certain type of independence or solidity, I guess. Wait, how am I getting confused? So they don't accept partless particles because they accept, if they were to exist, that would mean external phenomena would not exist dependent on the mind. By that same reasoning, would they say that consciousness can be divided endlessly? No, probably not. Because if it couldn't have that solidity that they propose, right? Anyway, something to check. Did I just make that noise? No. Never mind. I thought it was me. Okay. Anyway, going back to the Madhyamikas, the Yogacara Svatantrika, they also reject partless particles for a further reason. As I just said, whatever exists must have parts and therefore cannot be partless. So they are very clear on that in their writings, that you have three types of dependence, and the Svatantrika school definitely accept dependence on causes and conditions and dependence on parts. The third one is unique to the Prasangika school. Yeah, so that's definitely a Svatantrika assertion. This reasoning likewise applies to the Sautantrika Svatantrikas and the Prasangikas. They all accept whatever exists must have parts. Although these latter schools, the Sautantrika Svatantrikas and the Prasangika schools, they accept the existence of external phenomena. They definitely accept external phenomena. They nevertheless reject partless particles because they maintain that anything that exists must be analyzable into parts. Must be, you can analyze it in such a way that you take it apart. Thus, all Madhyamika schools, as well as the Chittamatra school, agree that partless particles do not exist, even though their reasons for doing so differ in certain respects. Okay, this part is clear, right? They all agree on that, but you can see for slightly different reasons. Having thus established why the Chittamatrans and Madhyamikas reject both partless particles and external phenomena composed of such particles, the question remains why they accept the third point. Okay, no partless particles, no objects composed of partless particles. But what about the third assertion? Namely, that an external phenomenon composed, or an external object actually, it should be an external object, composed of partless particles and the consciousness apprehending it are not substantially different entities. Last time I said they're one entity. I wasn't even thinking. What was I thinking? They're one entity. I couldn't even get it into my... Anyway, so the time before that, somehow I couldn't wrap my mind around that, of course, they cannot be a one entity. Just because two things are not different entities doesn't mean they have to be one entity. Those two are not directly contradictory, by the way, right? If two things, well, if both things exist, it's different, but actually directly contradictory is something else. For two things to be directly contradictory, it has to be based on something that exists. So if two things, oh yes, anyway, they're not directly contradictory, by the way. I had to think about it first. No, they're not directly contradictory because to be of a different substantial entity or to be one substantial entity, it's first of all, it's kind of like saying being of one nature and not of one nature. With one exception, it only applies to impermanent phenomena. When we say two things are of one entity or a different entity, that's the same as saying being of one nature or a different nature. That discussion we had last time. It means the same thing. It's just a different way of saying it. In Tibetan, you have also different words. For instance, the emptiness of this phone and the emptiness of the table. Okay. The emptiness of the phone and the emptiness of the table, they're different they're different entities. They're different natures, they're different entities. Do you agree? Emptiness of this table, emptiness of the phone. Okay. They're both permanent. And still, they're different substantial entities. Different entities, sorry, not substantial. But the phone and the table, not only are they different natures, different entities, they're different substantial entities. The word substantial implies impermanent. The word substantial implies impermanent. So when you say two things are one substantial entity or different substantial entities, you're saying by implication, you're saying that they're impermanent and either of a different nature or of one nature. Sounds very complicated. It's like it's complicated enough to remember for something that two phenomena can either be of one nature or of a different nature. So if you bring two phenomena, if you bring two things and you want to understand their relationship, or you look at their relationship, either they're of one nature or of a different nature. Either they're of one entity or of a different entity. And those mean the same thing. So if they're of one nature, they're of one entity. If they're of one nature, of different natures, they're of different entities. Okay. And the only extra complication is if you add the word substantial. Then you know that these two things are not only either of one nature or of a different nature, but they're also both impermanent. Does that make sense? Okay, so what about my arm and myself? One substantial entity or different substantial entities? One. Part and parcel. Part and whole, right? My hand is a part of my whole. So they're one substantial entity, exactly. And because they're both impermanent, yeah. What about emptiness of my arm and emptiness? No, the emptiness of my arm and my arm. One substantial entity or different substantial entities? Trick question. The emptiness of my arm and my arm. One substantial entity or different substantial entity?
One entity without the substantial.
One entity without the substantial. It's a trick question. Very good. One entity but without the substantial, because one is permanent, right? One is permanent. Right? Okay, another one. The impermanence of table and table. One substantial entity or different substantial entity? Impermanence of table and table. Dunya. Impermanence of table and table. One substantial entity or different substantial entities?
Different. A table?
A table and its impermanence. The impermanence of the table. The color of the table.
Same entity?
Yeah. Same substantial entity, right? It's a part of the table. The color of the table is a part of the table, therefore it's one substantial entity. Yes?
The impermanence of the table not permanent.
Is the impermanence of the table not permanent? No. It's not, even if it's abstract, but yeah. Yeah, I know, this is a little bit difficult, because there's nothing that is impermanence or impermanent that is permanent. Last time we talked about this, last time with the time before.
Impermanence in general.
In general, yes.
What was impermanence of the table?
Yeah, you remember we said last time there's this agreement. And there's a little more to it, but let's just call it an agreement because we can accept that right away. So if something has a common locus, or if there's something that is, let's say, X, that is also permanent, then X is permanent. Then X itself is permanent. X, you can say anything about X. So for instance, generality or existent. Let's take existent. Existent is permanent because there's something that is existent and permanent. If something exists that is permanent, then existent itself is permanent. That's kind of an agreement. If there's something that is existent and impermanent, doesn't mean that existence is impermanent. That's just the agreement. And there is more to it, and it kind of makes sense, but I don't want to get into an explanation on that now, because never mind. There's a little more to it. All right, having said this, the impermanence of the table, therefore, it's impermanent. Okay, but anyway, just if you understand, if you have two phenomena, for instance, this cup and the phone, the cup and the phone, one entity, one substantial entity or different substantial entities? This phone and this cup, one is substantial entity or different? Different, right? Different. Okay, because they're totally unrelated. I mean, like, you can smash one, you don't smash the other. Okay, never mind. I hope you understand to some degree. So going back to this here. So therefore, what are we talking about here? We're talking about these two things here. One is partless particles, or external phenomena made of partless particles. According to the Chittamatra school, do they exist or not? They don't exist. External phenomena made of partless particles, of course, don't exist. So these external phenomena composed of partless particles and the minds that accept them, are they one substantial entity or different? Pardon? Yeah. Externally existent phenomena, trick question. Externally existent phenomena composed of partless particles and the minds that apprehends them, one substantial entity or different substantial entity? Neither. Neither. Because there's no external. Because there's no externally existent phenomena composed of particles, right? Right? For something to be of a substantially different entity, like last time I got confused. I said they're one nature. I said exactly what you said. For no reason, really. No, but honestly, actually, if you think about it, externally existent phenomena, not just that they're externally existent, which the Chittamatra school doesn't accept, but on top of that, made of partless particles, and the mind apprehending them cannot be different substantial entities, because that would mean both exist, because both would have to be impermanent. But we've already established that neither the Chittamatrans nor the Madhyamikas accept that, right? So therefore, external phenomena composed of partless particles, since they don't exist, the consciousness is, so therefore the third point is accepted. Okay. So the reason is that for two things to be substantially So not substantially existent entities. The reason, and this is the last paragraph on page 186, the reason is that for two things to be substantially different entities, both must exist. I didn't even say they must be impermanent. I've explained it to you, but I don't want to go off in too many different directions in this write-up, so I didn't explain that. However, since there are no externally existent objects composed of partless particles, such objects and the consciousnesses that apprehend them cannot be substantially different entities. This is analogous to the horns of a rabbit and the horns of a cow, right? Horns of a rabbit, horns of a cow. Because horns of a rabbit's horns, rabbit horns is better. Because rabbit horns do not exist, they and the cow's horns, cow horns. What is better, cow's horns?
Yeah, cow horns.
Cow horns is better, right? Because rabbit horns do not exist, they, rabbit horns, and cow horns. Where does the come from? And cow horns cannot be substantially different entities. So just in case you don't know about rabbit horns, so the horns of a rabbit, they're a traditional Buddhist example. This is in footnote 43. They're very traditional, very famous kind of Buddhist example of a non-existent. I don't know how many rabbits. I mean, that must have come from India. So, you know, these scholars looking around, seeing lots of rabbits and coming up with this, I don't know. They're the object of a wrong consciousness. Maybe the Buddha himself talked about it. They're the object of a wrong consciousness, such as an eye consciousness that from a distance misperceives a rabbit ears. A rabbit, where does the come from? Misperceives rabbit ears, the ears of a rabbit ears, particularly when they are bent or folded in a way that resembles horns, right? As being horns. If such horns were to exist, they would be substantially different entities from the horns of a cow. If they were to exist, of course, they would be different substantial entities. But since rabbit horns do not exist, the horns of a rabbit and the horns of a cow cannot be substantially different entities because substantial difference requires both entities to exist, right? Makes sense, doesn't it? Okay. To fully understand, I read this. To fully understand the third assertion, however, it may be helpful to provide some further explanations of the views of the Chittamatra and Madhyamika schools. When they say don't exist of different natures or different entities, what do they actually talk about? Because by implication, okay, so if something that doesn't exist and its object, if something that doesn't exist and the mind that apprehends it are not different substantial entities, what about if something does exist? What are the views by these two schools? Okay, so let's look at it. Now it's getting a little bit more complicated, but not too bad. According to the Chittamatrans, since there are no externally existent material objects, a phenomenon such as a vase, it's always vase. Some say pot, but pot, I don't like the translation of pot for Pumba, because pot is, in my understanding, it's like a cooking pot. Like a vase, right? The definition of a vase. Flat-based, bulbous, flat-based, able to perform the function of holding water. Okay, pots can do that as well. But cups can do that too, so no big deal. But
it may be because Americans pronounce it vase.
oh, so vase and vase, I can't. Oh, because the vase, that sounds so wrong. And never mind. So, a vase. I prefer vase, but a lot of people say pot. Yeah, maybe because of the different, so tomatoes, you can't say, because they're so tomatoes. They have to say, can't talk about tomatoes because, no, never mind. Possibly, I don't know why they prefer pot. Yeah, I mean, I was thinking of first I was thinking of these Indian, sorry, this is so not important, but these, the Indian water pots, right? I was thinking of those, and you wouldn't call that a vase, you would call that a pot, right? A water pot where they carry water. So that is bulbous, flat-based. They'd have a rim. Chudo, they have lips. Do they really have lips? But maybe some have like a little lip things.
The ritual vase has a lip.
The ritual. That's why I thought of like a ritual. Yeah, that's what I thought. You know, I was thinking but then I was thinking, but that's in Tibet. The ritual vase, they would be vases, they would be called vases. But what did they look like in India? Did they look like water pots? And the Indians, the Tibetans just shaped them? I don't know. Never mind. Sorry. And this is so silly to go into a discussion on that term. But trust me, every example is usually a vase or a pillar. Vases and pillars. Pillars actually worse. We don't really talk about pillars. The vases we're more familiar with. Never mind that. Okay. So to fully understand the third assertion, it may be helpful to, according to the Chittamatrans, because there are no, so this is 187, because there are no externally existent material objects, a phenomenon such as a vase does not exist external to the consciousness apprehending it. Okay, so far I think we can all understand, doesn't exist external to that mind. In other words, the vase and the eye consciousness apprehending it are not substantially different entities. Rather, they are one substantial entity, for both arise from the same imprint. So they actually say this adds some complication to the meaning of one entity, one nature, different nature, because the Chittamatra school have that extra view of a mind and its object, in particular a sense consciousness and its object. They are of one nature, right? So that's another, but never mind. They usually say they're one nature because they arise from one imprint. Okay, so they're inseparably linked. Why? Because that one imprint gives rise simultaneously to the I consciousness and to the appearance of the to that awareness. So they arise from one imprint. Okay, so we all understand, right? So they're one substantial entity, an I consciousness and the I consciousness and the vas. So the I consciousness is apprehending the vas and the vas. Furthermore, the two. Okay, this is now so wordy. So I put it into italics so you can still see how long the phrase is. The absence of external existence of the vas, okay, lack of external existence of the vas, and the absence of the vas and the I consciousness apprehending the vas existing as substantially different entities. Mean the same thing, right? So the I consciousness, the vas doesn't exist external to the mind. And the problem is the absence of the vas. It would be incorrect to say, to put the vas and the mind apprehending the vas at the beginning and say they lack or they are empty of existing as different substantial entities. Because that would be an affirmative negation. The vas and the mind apprehending it, they lack, or they're empty of existing as substantial entities. Right? You have something affirmative here, the vas and its consciousness. So I think it's kind of an affirmative negation, which is better, why it's better to say, put the absence at the beginning. It applies to everything. The absence of a vas and the mind apprehending it being different substantial entities. Right? That is a non-affirming negation. It's just an absence. An absence of what? Of the mind and the I consciousness apprehending it, of the vas and the I consciousness apprehending it, being different substantial entities. That is negated. Right?
The I is empty of intrinsic existence.
Pardon?
The I is empty of intrinsic existence. Would you say it's an affirmative negation? The I is empty of intrinsic existence.
The I being empty of intrinsic existence. Kind of like the I kind of appears, right? The I, the absence, the lack of intrinsic existence of the I. We usually say I, not the I think he means the I. So the intrinsic existence, usually we say the lack of intrinsic existence of the I. In Tibetan, it's so easy. The empty comes at the end and it includes everything else. In Tibetan, you wouldn't say, for instance, in Tibetan, you say vas, intrinsic existent, empty. It's exactly the other way around. But you wouldn't say not intrinsically existent vas. When you say not intrinsically existent vas, then that's a vas, right? It's an affirmative. It's an affirmative negation. And if you say in Tibetan, in English it would be like saying a vas that is not intrinsically existent. That is that's a vas. A vas that is not intrinsically existent is a vas. That's an affirmative negation. Does that make sense? In Tibetan, I say it in Tibetan for those of you who know Tibetan, Pumba Demba Drupa Tongba Pumba Ranshingi Drupa Tongba is a non-affirmative negation. That's like saying the absence of intrinsic existence of the vas. Versus saying Ranshingi Matrupa Pumba. Ranshingi Matrupa Pumba. Ranshingi Matrupa Pumba, which means vas which lacks intrinsic existence. You see, there's a difference. That's why I hesitate to put it in such a way that I say the vas and the mind apprehending it lack intrinsic existence. Okay, it's different to saying that lack never mind. It probably is okay to say that, but I didn't have the time to think about it really long enough, and so I just put it this way. In Lama Tsongkhapa's text, the translation is slightly different, but in Tibetan, it's always like the negation. In order to include everything you're saying, the word that negates that comes at the end. In English, it would be at the beginning, because it's just the other way around in this case, not in all cases, not always the other way around. But in this case, if you want to say something is not, in English you say it in the beginning, in Tibetan you say it at the end. So the absence of a vas and the mind apprehending it being different substantial entities. Does that make sense? Vas and the mind apprehending being that is the same as saying vas doesn't exist externally. And that is emptiness, according to the Chittamatra school. That is emptiness. Both are considered to be the emptiness of the vas. Right? The vas, the absence of the vas existing externally. That's the emptiness of the vas. Plus the absence of the vas and the I consciousness apprehending the vas being different substantial entities. Both are emptiness of the vas. Okay.
There's no subtle difference for them?
According to Benjamin Dapa, no. Okay, so there could be some discussion. I don't know about the others, kind of assertions, the assertions of other textbook authors. According to Benjamin Dapa, they're the same. So let's leave it for now that they're the same. We could discuss that, but usually they're accepted to be emptiness. By contrast, the absence of an externally existent object composed of partless particles and the consciousness apprehending it, existing as substantially different entities, is not considered emptiness in the Chittamatra school. This is because neither such an external object nor the partless particles from which it is supposedly composed exist. For the absence of an object and the consciousness apprehending it existing as substantially different entities to qualify as emptiness, the object in question must exist. So in other words, the absence of, let's take the Prasangika school, the absence of intrinsic existence of the horns of a rabbit. Is that emptiness? No, the horns of a rabbit don't exist. It's very easy to understand it doesn't exist intrinsically. That's not difficult to understand, right? If you understand the horns of a rabbit don't exist, you understand the horns of a rabbit doesn't exist intrinsically, right? Doesn't exist, how can it exist intrinsically? Therefore, the horns of the lack of intrinsic in the Prasangika school, and this is true for the other schools too, the same kind of logic. For something to be emptiness, the emptiness of something, that something has to exist, right? So otherwise you can say lack of intrinsic. Of course, the lack of intrinsic existence of the horns of a rabbit exist, but they're not emptiness. They're not a slightly hidden phenomenon. They're pretty obvious. Does that make sense? If you know the horns of a rabbit don't exist, you know they don't exist intrinsically. Or do you think, oh, they don't exist, but maybe they exist intrinsically? Who's going to think that, right? When you know the horns of a rabbit don't exist, you know they don't exist. They're not impermanent. You know they're not tangible. You know, right? Nothing of what you say, right? So therefore, the horns of similarly here. For something to be the emptiness, for instance, of the of something, to be the emptiness of something, that thing has to exist. But, as we've heard, externally existent phenomena composed of subtle particles don't exist. So therefore, the absence of these non-existent particles, or the non-existent objects, and the phenomenon apprehending it being different substantial entities, is not emptiness. Cannot be emptiness. This is because neither such an external object nor the partless particles from which it's supposedly composed exist. So we talk about external phenomena composed of partless particles. Don't exist. For the absence of an object and the consciousness apprehending it existing as substantially different entities to qualify as emptiness. So that absence of this substantially different entity of these two, to qualify as emptiness, the object in question must exist, since it serves as the basis of that emptiness. The basis of an emptiness must always exist, for emptiness is necessarily the emptiness of something. Or something is probably the wrong word. The emptiness of a phenomenon, not something, because you could say once a rabbit or something. Would you say that? No, not really, right? I said phenomenon though, it doesn't matter. If the basis is non-existent, there's no meaningful emptiness to posit. Is it okay to say it's necessarily the emptiness of something? What do you think? Depends on how you look at something.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, it's an expression, isn't it?
It's an expression, yeah.
It means an existence.
It means an existence, actually, right?
Yeah.
But I did say it's necessarily the emptiness of a phenomenon.
Yeah.
I just changed that just in case someone has any doubt about this. Consequently, the Chittamatras hold that an externally existent object composed of partless particles and the consciousness apprehending it are neither one substantial entity nor different substantial entities. This is because, explained above, no such object exists. So, okay, but you see how they do differentiate. Once the object is not an external phenomenon composed of partless particles, if it's a vase, the absence of that and the awareness apprehending it being different substantial entities, that's emptiness. Yeah? So in this case, however, they agree with the Madhyamikas. Okay, now let's look at the Madhyamika school. Regarding the Madhyamikas, it is important to distinguish between the Prasangika, Sautrantika, Svatantrika. It is important to distinguish. So we're on 188. Regarding the Madhyamikas, it is important to distinguish between the Prasangika and Sautrantika, Svatantrika schools on the one hand, those that accept external existence, and the Yogacarya Svatantrika school on the other. According to the first, so according to the Prasangika and Sautrantika schools, the vase and the eye consciousness apprehending the vase are not one substantial entity, right? The Chittamatra school would say they're one substantial entity. They're inseparably linked. The moment you have an eye consciousness apprehending vase, you have a vase. Does that make sense? Like in a dream, it's not like first there must be a vase somewhere and then your dream consciousness perceives it. No, why do we dream of a vase? Because an imprint ripens in your mind, and so there is a dream eye consciousness. It's not an actual eye consciousness, we just call it that. It's actually a concept, a mental consciousness. But the moment that imprint ripens, you have the appearance of a vase and the mind apprehending it. That's how the Chittamatra school looks at even the awakened state. They look at the awakened state in the same way, saying a vase, when it appears to your eye consciousness, it's not out there. It's not that it exists a moment earlier, but instead they come into existence simultaneously through this one imprint, or through a particular imprint. So that imprint is based on the mind, and when it ripens, you have the appearance of a vase and the eye consciousness apprehending the vase. So in other words, you have an eye consciousness apprehending the vase and the appearance of the vase to that eye consciousness. Both come into existence together. Is that a vase? Yes. Does it exist externally? No. Okay. But in those schools, namely Prasangika and Sautrantika, schools that accept external existence, so here Prasangika and Sautrantika, Sautrantika, Svatantrika. Yep, thank you. Gosh.
It's schools.
Yeah, schools, because it's two. So the Prasangika, including the Prasangika school. So according to the Prasangika and Sautrantika, Svatantrika. So the word Svatantrika is missing. I've already edited. So for the next time you get the new material, you have it hopefully without all the mistakes. The vase and the eye consciousness apprehending the vase are not one substantial entity. They're not one entity. This is because they accept the existence of external objects and therefore maintain that a material object or physical object, such as a vase, exists external to the eye consciousness, apprehending it. Indeed, the vase is considered to be one of the causes of the eye consciousness apprehending it. Before it can appear, so before the eye, so think there's a vase out there, the way we look at the world. So before the vase can appear to an eye consciousness, the vase appears to the eye sense faculty, they say, which is just another way of saying the image of the vase is projected onto the retina of the eye, giving rise to neural signals that are transmitted through the optic nerve and processed by the visual cortex. Right? That's what modern science would say about what happens. Tibetans just say it appears to the eye sense faculty. I mean, that's fine. The Buddhists would say that, but really that's just a short version of saying, you know, the whole retina, optic nerve, and so forth.
When I studied this,
Yeah.
I was told that the completely intact and healthy eye sense organ that lacked the sense faculty would not function. In other words, that there's a difference.
Okay. So Venerable Genzin Lama's question is, when she learned this, you learned it from a Tibetan?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. But yes, I've heard that as well. Not exactly like that. But not exactly like that. Saying, so Venerable Genzin Lama, what she just said is, what she learned was that a totally intact sense organ, sense organ, and you mean the eye organ, right? Okay, so that's different. So the eye organ, if it's totally intact, but if the eye sense faculty is not, you can't see. That I agree with, because the eye sense faculty doesn't just include the eye sense, the eye itself, but also the part of the brain that is responsible for seeing something. That always reminds me, what's his name? What's the name of this person from Ireland? He's come here a few times to meet His Holiness. He's very good friends with His Holiness. I mean, he's not a Buddhist, so he considers His Holiness a friend. Very hard to say His Holiness is my friend, spiritual friend. Okay, but anyway, so no, they're very close. Like he's one of the friends. Like His Holiness has like friends like Desmond Tutu, for instance, the late Desmond Tutu. So this man, really amazing person, and he met His Holiness many years ago, and he's blind. He met His Holiness. He's blind, and he was blinded in Northern Ireland when he was a small boy. And the British policeman shot at him and hit him in the head with one of these rubber bullets, and it destroyed something in his brain. So he turned blind. And what's so beautiful about this guy is he's so compassionate. He met the policeman and the guy who shot him, and they became very friendly, and of course forgave him. And the policeman didn't do this on purpose. Of course, he wasn't part of the protests. Apparently, he just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. But he was blinded as a young boy, and since that time, he practices compassion and forgiveness and. No matter what happens. And so, of course, this connection with His Holiness. Never mind, that's a long story, sorry. But ever since that time, because I remember he once came here and he gave a talk, and he talked about how he turned blind. And that was so like, what? His eyes are fully functioning? Yes, but his brain is not. So apparently something was damaged in his brain, which means he cannot see, although his eyes fully functioning. So when I heard this story for the first time, I thought, oh, so when they talk about the eye organ, they didn't talk about the brain, I hope. If they talk about the brain, it's a different matter. But if you just talk about the eye organ, if that is fully functioning and the eye sense faculty isn't, that makes perfect sense to me. Because I'm thinking of this man, Michael, no, I forget. So this man, his eyes fully functioning, but his eye sense faculty isn't, because the part of the brain needed for visual inputs has been damaged. Does that work?
Well, no, I don't think so, because the idea is that the eye sense of power is subtle form. It's not actual gross form.
Yes, when they say the eye sense faculty or the eye sense power is subtle form, I believe what they're saying is there is a subtle aspect of the brain. I mean, like the brain. So I mean, it's so complicated. I don't think it necessarily means that it's something beyond the form that we can see. I don't.
Because it's an NACP, a non-associated compositional factor.
No, it's form. It's internal form, not external form. You see, it's not a non-associated compositional factor because it's physical, and physical form is either external or internal. The eye sense faculty is described as its internal form. And internal form is still form. But the subtle form, yes, I mean, for the longest time, I also thought that. I thought that there must be something beyond brain and optic nerve and so forth. But that was after I heard about him. Then for a while I was thinking, oh, there must be something beyond that. But now I no longer think that. I think it's just that very subtle, because we can't see it. We can't see what's happening. We may see the visual cortex. I mean, if someone, shows us a brain and says this is the visual cortex, but we cannot see. We cannot see what's going on when the eye consciousness, or when the VAS is reflected in the retina and so forth. That's hidden to us. Even though we can see the brain, we can maybe even show us an optic nerve. Someone, that's the optic nerve, right? If, let's say, you can actually see your own optic nerve, right? Seeing something, can you see what's going on? No, you can't. So I came to the conclusion, but I could be wrong, that this happening, whatever happens, the optic nerve, the signals, the neural signals, we know about it through modern science, but to look at it, right? We can see the optic nerves, we can see the part of the brain, but to see that actually a visual process is happening, we can't. That's what I understood to be the subtle, but I could be wrong. That's just my view. I don't know.
But the essence of power is not form, but it possesses form.
Who says that? Internal. Let me just quickly look at Nangisu.
A very hidden object. The essence of power is a very hidden object.
Okay, let's to be sure I'm not telling you something that's wrong. I'm Nangisu. Okay.
That's not about the subtle form, just not
Da,
perceivable.
here. This is the English. This is the Tibetan dictionary, the Möllem dictionary. So I looked up internal form, and it quotes the 5 sense powers. So, Wangbonga. Kiwagi shigi gudu besuk de wangbonga da wani nangi sochin tangwawu.
The Vaibhashikas and Sautranticas believe it's form.
The Vaibhashikas believe.
The Vaibhashikas and the Sautranticas believe that it is form.
No, but this is from the Prasangika school point of view.
Okay.
Yeah, because otherwise it would specify in this dictionary. This is actually a really good dictionary. If you want definitions of something in Tibetan, for both of you, the Möllem Grand Tibetan Dictionary. We probably know about it. This is what it looks like. If you know Tibetan. This is really good. And then you have a little icon that's yellow. It's quite good. Yeah, if you want definitions. Unfortunately, it has been translated. Parts of it have been translated, but not everything. Anyway, sorry, going back to, but this is still an important question about the sense faculties. It is quite fascinating. And when you study in more detail, it comes up a lot. Okay, so anyway, let's go back to what we were saying. Anyway, so what happens? The sense faculty and the object meet. And as a result of that, therefore, the eye sense faculty and the VAS both serve as causes for the arising of the eye consciousness apprehending the VAS. That's the 3rd paragraph on page 188. Okay, so for this reason, the VAS not only exists prior to the eye consciousness apprehending it, must exist. So to be in the present, it's not exactly happening to be in the present moment because no, you're always a moment late, never mind. But also functions as one of its causes. But also functions. So not only does the VAS not exist at the same time as the eye consciousness, and so the thing is, if 2 things are one nature, one thing to test is to test is, do they exist at the same time or not? If they do not exist at the same time, they're never of one nature, okay? And of course, obviously, in the case of one thing being the characteristic of something else, they exist at the same time. Therefore, they're of one nature. the whole question is, for instance, when you cut off the head of a chicken, no, let's say snake, is that the head of a snake? The head of a snake. If the cut, not the head of the stick. If you cut off the head of a snake, is that the head of a snake? Well, strictly speaking, it's not, because there's no snake. How can it be the head of a snake? We say that, right? We say that. But in the Buddhist context, the head of a snake and the snake are one entity. No head, no snake. So it is the head of something that used to be a snake. I mean, we do talk like that, you know, like if I lie here dead, then, oh, that's the body of Kasamwamo. People would say that. But actually, it's not. Because Kasamwamo is somewhere else. No longer called Kasamwamo. But if you think of it, if in that moment that was my body, then I would be here. If it's my body, but I'm not here, that's weird. It's a part of me. So it's the body of what used to be Kasamwamo. So you don't ever eat chicken, by the way. Well, unless you buy it when it's still alive. Right? I mean, strictly speaking, you don't eat chicken if it's dead. Because it's not the flesh of chicken. It's not the flesh of chicken. It's the flesh of something that used to be a chicken. So in other words, strictly speaking, but I'm not saying we're not allowed to say, you know, what's on the menu, chicken. No. Of course, but strictly speaking, either a chicken is an animal, and therefore the head of a chicken must be the head of an animal, or you have to redefine chicken. Right? Yeah. So when I said to you previously, when we study how to debate, oh gosh, there were some questions, but oh, someone sent me a picture with the horns of a rabbit.
Yeah.
Together with, that's not a rabbit. Tibetans would say, then it's not a rabbit. Never mind. Bernd sent this, but anyway, no, let's go back to what I was trying to say. What was I saying?
Headless chicken. Not the headless chicken.
Oh no, when we study philosophy, we fast learn to be really precise with the kind of terminology we use. So you use words only in a particular sense, to a particular way. And we have these debates, you know, like with the chicken head and so forth. Well, it doesn't mean everyone agrees on that. But honestly, if you define a chicken as a being that is alive, it must have a head. It has a head, right?
Geshe-la, you know the story about the headless chicken. Lama Zopa Rinpoche loved it.
Oh,
As a proof that you can live without the brain.
Ah.
You know?
Okay, all right.
You heard about it?
I heard about it because they still run around for a while when
Over
they...
a year.
Oh, a year?
Yeah, it was an attraction. The guy really, he fed it through the,
Oh.
you know, and then got some money, you know, going to the
So
fairs.
someone cut off the head of the chicken and the chicken, or
The
was
chicken
it
still
born?
lived.
So it wasn't born without a head?
No.
No, someone cut off its head and it didn't die and they continued to keep it and feed it. Oh,
And it lived for more than a year.
it lived for more than a year. That is interesting. All right, so that doesn't work. It's still the head. That was still the head of the chicken in this case. I thought chicken would die pretty soon afterwards. I mean, sometimes they still run around, but I thought that was just a nerve kind of thing of the nerve. Oh, but humans? Well, there's this guy called Noah. Remember? I talked about this. I talked about him a lot. The boy without a brain. It's one of those things you can still Google probably. A British boy, actually. He was born. He was actually in the womb of his mother. And while he was in the womb, there was a problem with the spinal fluid. The spinal fluid flowed into his brain and destroyed his brain. So he had a brain originally, and then that fluid destroyed his brain. And it also left him paralyzed. But that's beside the point. As the mother was pregnant with him, she had some checkups, and the doctors told her, well, your boy is not going to have a brain. I mean, they could see it in the scan that there was only, or in a, not like a scan, I guess, like an ultrasound, they could see that only the outer parts that kind of covers the inner part of the skull, that was still there. But the rest was black. You can see the pictures. And so the doctor said, well, you may want to abort the child because it's not viable, the fetus is not viable, it's going to die. But because they were religious, I seem to remember, they decided not to abort it. And the boy was born, and he thrived. He had no brain, but he did what other boys did too, except he was paralyzed. But that has nothing to do with, well, it had to do with the spinal fluid. But he thrived, and they treated him like any other child, and they taught him things. They taught him he could speak in the end. But after 2 or 3 years, they did another brain scan, and his brain was there. I mean, you can see the scan. So apparently their theory was because the mind was trained in such a way that the brain started growing. And now he has a normal brain. So talk about mind over matter. So in this case, it's true what Bernd said. It's not necessarily with the example of the Alzheimer, the nuns, the plaque in the brain and so forth. You can't necessarily prove, but here, very difficult to say it's not that. Again, you could argue something else, but yeah, anyway, the story, and you can look him up, The Boy Without a Brain. His name is Noah. I forget his last name. I thought his first name was Noah. But that's an interesting story. So therefore, yeah, he theoretically could have, well, I don't know. Never mind about the head and so forth. But, okay, let's go back to this. Sorry, I got a little distracted. It wasn't too long, though, 5 minutes. Okay, so the vas, going back to the Prasangika school and the Sautrantika Svatantrika, the vas not only exists prior to the I consciousness apprehending it, but also functions as one of its causes. Okay. Where did we get to? However, an externally existent object composed of partless particles, so that's the second paragraph from the bottom on page 188. However, an externally existent object composed of partless particles and the consciousness apprehending it are not different substantial entities. So previously, the I consciousness and the vas and the I consciousness apprehending the vas are different substantial entities because they're cause and effect, right? Cause and effect are always, if something is the cause of something else, then those two have to always be different substantial entities. However, an externally existent object composed of partless particles and the consciousness apprehending it are not different substantial entities. This is because it's explained above, for an object and the consciousness apprehending it to be different substantial entities, both the object and the consciousness must exist, right? Coming back to this again, but different assertions. Vas and I consciousness apprehending the vas. Chittamatra and Prasangika has very different views on that, right? But when it comes to something that doesn't exist, they agree. Therefore, the Prasangika and Sautrantika Svatantrika schools also accept the third position, namely that an externally existent object composed of partless particles and the consciousness apprehending it are not different substantial entities. Unlike the Chittamatrans, however, they do not hold that such an object and the consciousness apprehending it would be one substantial entities if it existed. If hypothetically this external phenomenon made up of partless particles were to exist, it would be not of one substantial entity, right? If it really existed, then think of a vase made of partless particles. If hypothetically it were to exist, it would be a vase. And then the I consciousness apprehending it and the vase would be different substantial entities in the Prasangika school. Right? Is this difficult? The hypothetical. Hypothetical. It doesn't mean anything is possible. In philosophy, we do this a lot. We say, if hypothetically, let's say, if the horns of a rabbit existed, they would not grow on the bum of the rabbit. Would they? They would not grow on the behind. Where would they grow? Up here. So hypothetically, we kind of say, even in Tibetan, you would say that, right? I mean, jokingly. Right? If the horns of the rabbit were to exist, they would be on the head of the rabbit and not on its behind. It means if it existed, we're not saying anything is possible because it doesn't exist, but we're saying contente. In Tibetan, they say contente. So whatever you want, kind of thing. That doesn't work. No, it has to be something specific. If the horns of a rabbit exist, they're horns. They grow on the head. So similarly, here, if a vase made of partless particles, right? Let's take the vase. Vase made of partless particles doesn't exist, of course not. But if it did exist, it would be a vase. It would not be a toothbrush or I don't know, whatever. It would make sense. It would be an actual vase. And then that vase, according to the Prasangika school, that vase and the I consciousness apprehending it would be different substantial entities. Whereas in the Chittamatra school, again, they would agree there's no externally existent vase, there's no vase composed of particles, but if it did exist, hypothetically, it would be a vase, and then it and the I consciousness apprehending it would be one substantial entity. You see? Different views on that. Okay. So rather, they maintain that if such an object existed, the Prasangika school in Svatantrika says, it and the consciousness apprehending it would be different substantial entities since the object would function as one of the causes of that consciousness. All right. Okay, so this far we're almost done with this. I know it's a lot of information, but you see, it helps us to understand better these two schools, right? And when we studied this, the teacher went through it, either went through it, or we already knew this because we had studied Chittamatra for long enough, so it didn't require explanation. But yeah, I don't remember exactly, but in my notes, it's shortly mentioned. So our teacher probably, talked about it to some degree. The Yogacara Svatantrika, so they're the only ones left. We covered the Chittamatra, we covered the Prasangika and Sautantrika Svatantrika. Now the Yogacara Svatantrikas, they agree with the Chittamatrans that a material object such as a vase and the consciousness apprehending it are one substantial entity. Right? No external existence, therefore they have to be one substantial entity. Does that make sense? Right? Don't exist externally, they have to be one substantial entity. Accordingly, they also accept the absence of the vase and the consciousness apprehending it existing at different substantial entities. Right? It's just saying the same thing again. So the absence of what? Vase and the mind apprehending it existing at different substantial entities. Okay, they accept that. However, they disagree that this absence constitutes emptiness. Lack of external existence in the Chittamatra school is emptiness. In the Yogacara Svatantrika school, it's not emptiness. It's not emptiness. Very important distinction. One of the main distinctions between the Chittamatra school and the Yogacara Svatantrika. Both say external phenomena don't exist. But the Chittamatra school, they say absence of external phenomena is emptiness. Yogacara Svatantrika says it's not emptiness. It's true, it doesn't exist, yes, but that is not emptiness. Emptiness is subtler. Why? Because they say that emptiness refers to the absence of true existence. In other words, the absence of something existing without appearing to our mind. They say that's even subtler than the emptiness in the Chittamatra school. And therefore they identify the emptiness or the ultimate truth of the vase as its lack of true existence. They say lack of true existence means the vase does not exist in such a way in that it exists without appearing to a correct mind. Does that make sense? Am I losing you guys? No. Am I losing you? No? You're still following? Yeah. Yeah? Okay, good. All right, in sum, we got to this part. So in summary. Okay, in short. Maybe in sum is weird. In short. While disagreeing with some of the core tenets of the Chittamatra system, the Madhyamika schools, namely the Prasangikas, Sautantrikas, Svatantrikas, and Yogacara Svatantrikas, nonetheless accept the three assertions discussed above. Some of the core tenets, most of the core tenets, many of the core tenets. Many is better than some. Many, is it some? Many is better. Many of the core tenets. So they do agree with these three assertions discussed above, the non-existence of partless particles and so on. Yet this shared acceptance is not merely theoretical. The different Madhyamika schools also accept, and this is part of what Lama Tsongkhapa said, yet this shared acceptance is not merely theoretical. The different Madhyamika schools also accept that if practitioners whose minds are tamed by the Chittamatra approach meditate on these 3 points over a long period of time, they can gain direct insight into them and gradually cultivate familiarity with those realizations. It's possible. There are no external phenomena composed of partless particles, and so on and so forth. These 3 assertions, you could come to a direct realization of them. It's possible. I mean, anyway, studying the Chittamatra school or following the Chittamatra school in like meditating on them, in general, it's a good idea, even though you cannot realize the lack of external existence because it doesn't exist, but it's a good idea to meditate on it, right? That's a good idea. So think the person that makes me angry, the body makes me angry, the speech makes me angry. Well, those are just appearances to my mind because those are physical objects and they just appear to my mind. Their mind is a different matter, but I don't see their mind. What I see, what I can perceive is their body, is their speech. Therefore, what happens with my anger? How angry can I be if it's just an imprint? Okay, so therefore, understanding that and these 3 points, which are actually something that all the schools, not all the schools, I mean the Chittamatra and the Madhyamikas, they all accept, well, you can attain a realization of that. Okay. Yeah, the shared okay. Wait. It is for this reason. Okay. It is for this reason that Acharya Chandrakirti, we're now on page 189, the 4th paragraph from the bottom. It is for this reason that Acharya Chandrakirti accepts these particular Chittamatra assertions as valid and suitable objects of meditation, even though he rejects other aspects of the school. Okay, similar to before, right? So, what does he reject? And this is also part of what Lama Tsongkhapa said. For instance, from a Madhyamika perspective, the Chittamatra claim that bodhisattvas can proceed through the bodhisattva grounds and traverse the final 3 stages of the path on the basis of realizing the absence of objects and the consciousnesses apprehending them, existing as different substantial entities, so the lack of external existence, which the Chittamatrans identify as emptiness, must be understood as provisional. Remember, at the very beginning, it said here in the part from Lama Tsongkhapa, however, the statements above, the statements about how one can traverse the 10 bodhisattva grounds as well as the 3 final stages of the path on that basis, these a Madhyamika will interpret as provisional. Okay, so what is that? That is the Chittamatra view of emptiness. The Chittamatra view of emptiness, that's not what is accepted by the Prasangikas or by the Svatantrikas, right? Lack of external existence, and that, as the Chittamatrans would say, on the basis of realizing that emptiness, you can become a Buddha. No way, they would never accept that. Okay, so that's an example of what they don't accept. Therefore, although the Buddha's teachings on the Chittamatra system are considered pedagogically effective and capable of leading to genuine insights and spiritual progress, they do not express the Buddha's definite intent. So what did we just learn? There are certain ideas in the Chittamatra school, and you could have mentioned the imprints, for instance. The whole idea of imprints is explained in such detail. That's also one assertion, that not in the entire roles of the imprints, but to better understand how imprints play such a huge role in our perception. To better understand that, the Chittamatra system is very helpful. You just become more familiar with that. But here, of course, Acharya Chandrakirti, or Lama Tsongkhapa for that matter, doesn't mention the imprints. He mentions these 3 assertions that we've gone through in much detail, right? The refutation of external phenomena being composed of partless particles, the existence of partless particles, and so forth. So all this is accepted by the Madhyamika school as well, but there are, of course, assertions that are different. Okay. To summarize the broader argument, Lama Tsongkhapa now bringing everything together again. The broader argument Lama Tsongkhapa is making here, like the other Buddhist tenet holders, the Prasangika accept the core 16 aspects, in particular the absence of a self-sufficient substantially existent I, and agree that hearers and solely true realizers meditate on these 16 aspects, first cognizing them inferentially, then directly, and subsequently cultivating familiarity with those realizations. So this part the Prasangika school accepts. However, they disagree with those Buddhist philosophers who maintain that the absence of a self-sufficient substantially existent I constitutes subtle selflessness, and that realizing this alone, together with the remaining 15 characteristics of the Four Noble Truths, is sufficient for the attainment of liberation, as explained in the Abhidharma literature. According to the Prasangika, such explanations are provisional and should not be understood literally. The present discussion of the Chittamatra system serves as an analogous example. So the whole discussion we had before is just an example of that. Like the Chittamatrans, the Madhyamikas accept the non-existence of particles, the non-existence of externally existent objects composed of such particles, and the absence of such objects, and the consciousnesses apprehending them, existing as substantially different entities. They also agree that practitioners who find the Chittamatra approach helpful can meditate on these points, first realize them inferentially, then directly, and subsequently cultivate familiarity with those realizations. Nevertheless, they do not accept the Chittamatra claim that the absence of external existence, or the absence of an object and the consciousness apprehending it, existing as different substantial entities, constitutes emptiness, and thereby serves as a basis for traversing the Bodhisattva grounds and attaining the final stages of the path. According to the Madhyamikas, such teachings are provisional and cannot be accepted literally. Can you see how it all comes together? Maybe it was too long and you lost it in between, or it actually comes together, right? Doesn't it? Beautifully. Maybe, I don't know whether it's too long, but I'm open for any input, any feedback. If it's too long, I mean, this week went on forever. I know, but what should I have left out? It's kind of repetitive at times, but I don't know how else to say it. Yeah, I don't know. But now I'm not happy with the English translation. There's very little that right? But I thought to put it in, why not mentioning it? This is just a suggestion. I was going to put it in a footnote, but that would be a long footnote. And then I thought, well, why not mention it? Please note that the English rendering of the third of the 3 points in illuminating the intent could be potentially misleading, because in Tibetan you don't have this. The English translation reads, negation of a subject that possesses a substance different from its object can be established by means of valid cognition. Its object, it just says its object. It doesn't talk about what was previously mentioned, externally existent phenomena composed of partless particles. If you look at the root text means Lama Tsongkhapa's text. Therefore, a clearer rendering of the Tibetan would be negation of a subject that possesses a substance different from those objects, the ones mentioned before. Because in Tibetan it also says te yul, which means this object. So it refers back to, what is that object? External object composed of partless particles. The difference between its objects and those objects is philosophically significant here. The phrase those objects refers specifically to external objects composed of partless particles, because they were mentioned in the previous sentence, and thus implies the negation of such objects and the consciousnesses apprehending them existing as different substantial entities. This constitutes the third assertion discussed above, which is accepted by Chittamatrans and Madhyamikas alike, right? So those objects. By contrast, the phrase its object naturally suggests the objects of a consciousness in general. If you say just its object, there's nothing that suggests it refers to the previous discussion of external objects composed of partless particles, and may therefore be misunderstood, or may therefore be understood as referring to the absence of objects and the consciousness apprehending them existing as different substantial entities, of existent objects, of objects in general, may therefore be understood as referring to the absence of objects, of existing objects, I should say, of existing objects, and the consciousness apprehending them, or it's object of, it's a little funny with the existing, then existing and having the existing again as part of the rest of the sentence, referring to the absence of existing objects and the consciousness apprehend, such as a vase, okay, to the absence of objects such as a vase, such as sense consciousness, such as sense objects, and the consciousness is apprehending them existing as different substantial entities. In the Sutta Madhya school, as explained above, this constitutes emptiness, right? If it's just its object, it seems to imply just objects in general, and that would mean these objects and the mind's apprehending them not being different substantial entities. That's emptiness, right? Because objects just in general be just existent objects. That's why I think it's better to change that. It's not that you need to know that. It's not. When I read this, I thought, I'm not going to mention that, never mind, I need to. But it's good to know philosophically. It's good, I thought it's good to know. And in case you read this and you go, it's object, nothing seems to be saying that talking about objects, partless particles, especially because I got really confused in the beginning because I didn't read the Tibetan first. I was lazy. So usually I read the Tibetan first and then I read the Tibetan English. But at that point, I don't know, the book was not in reach, or I don't know, no, I wasn't even using the book, but that was on my iPad. But anyway, I was just the English, and I was like, what? How can that be valid cognition? I just couldn't. And then I went back to the Tibetan, and I was like, of course, of course, it doesn't exist. So yeah, I stumbled over that because of the English. And so in case you do as well, now you know, I think it's just one word that could be changed. Done. It took me a solid 6 hours today to redo this because it was all over the place. I wrote something totally different. I got so confused between the different schools. I remember when I wrote it, I was distracted. I got up, I did different things the first time. And so it was all over the place. Today I made a point, I'm not going to get up. I didn't have lunch. Because I got confused. You see, it is really confusing, the different views and what do they accept and stuff. I had a big breakfast, so no worries. But I decided, no, I'm not going to get up. I'll just continue writing this because I get confused. Last time I did. Does it make sense? Okay. Well, don't just say that now, just because. Okay, great.
Why does Lama Tsongkhapa give this example? Like, it's not exactly
an easy example.
It's not exactly the same also, like.
Well, examples are never the same. That's why they're called example.
Like it's something which is valid and can be meditated to get direct realization.
What Lama Tsongkhapa is doing, he used two scenarios. I mean, he used a scenario, a second scenario, which is the same in 2 or 3 aspects. One aspect is the Buddha taught it. The second aspect is parts of what the Buddha taught can be accepted and can also be realized, and parts of it cannot. See, so in particular, when it comes to what you need to realize in order to reach your goal, what does the Abhidharma literature say? They say, okay, so there are these 16 aspects. Prasangika accepts. The way they explain them, they accept. But you have to only realize that. That's what you have to realize in order to become liberated? No. With the Chitta Matra school, there are certain assertions they do accept, but when you replace this object, the non-existent object, with an existent object, saying that is emptiness and that's what you have to realize, no, that doesn't work. So only those 2 aspects, or 2 aspects, they are the same. Otherwise, of course, it's different. Yeah, I used to also say that to my teacher, like, They would always react like that. I'd be like, yeah, but in the example, it's different. And they're like, it's an example. And there's a saying in the scriptures, it only goes this far, basically. An example only goes this far. So yeah, they would always kind of, if I complained about the example, they'd be like, it's just right? So remember that examples, they always fall short. They don't exactly, because otherwise they would be synonymous. But my teachers, especially in the beginning, that was more in the beginning, later on you get used to it. The example always falls short, but you look at what it has in common with that which is exemplified and they leave out the rest, right? Okay, yes, you're welcome. Okay, so now I have a few things that were posted here. When we talk, Rika is saying, when we talk about Buddha nature, saying everyone has it, we cannot lose it, etc. It sounds like a basis or even like intrinsic. Yes, it is intrinsic. It is inherent. Naturally there. It is. Remember last time we had this whole discussion. So it is actually, when we use the word intrinsic is apparently, well, Venerable Gensenhammer would know that better. The word intrinsic is not used as much in English, right? Do you use that a lot? No, right? Inherent, maybe natural, much more, right? It's used less. That's why I chose it, by the way. Because intrinsically, inherently, it's kind of used in other ways. Naturally, it's not, So to use it for the object of negation, intrinsically is quite good. In Tibetan, you have certain ways of saying naturally. Which usually that usually refers to the object of negation, the way it's expressed. Rangshingi, they say rangshingi, ko rangshingi, ko rangi rangshingi. They use the word inherent the whole time. It's inherent, yes. It's inherent to all of us to have Buddha nature. Yes, yes. Oh, you weren't here last time. Okay, this is an important idea. Would you say the UK is an independent country? Oh, no, I'm kidding, you're right. But it's kind of like, who says that, But of course you can say that. In the Tibetan you can say that as well. You use words like, it exists independent of that. They sometimes use those words. In a political sense they would use it anyway, but even in a philosophical sense. Because in relation to certain things, you can say it exists independently. But when we say nothing exists independently, we're using it in an absolute sense, like totally independent of anything. Similarly, when we say inherently, so the discussion of existing inherently or not, we can say, I said that during the last class, for instance, wetness is inherent in water. Which basically means in relation to the fact that I don't have to do anything to make water wet. Water is wet, right? Is hot water, is the heat in water, is being hot in the nature of water? No, I have to heat it to make it hot. So in that way, we use inherent in the sense that I don't have to do anything. I don't have to do anything.
It's an inherent quality, but it's not inherent existence.
Yeah, it's an inherent quality in the sense that it's natural to it. But if it were inherently existent, it wouldn't depend on anything else to be water or to be wet. Similarly, our Buddha nature is inherent to us. It's natural to us. But it's not inherently existent because that would mean it wouldn't depend on anything else. It would depend on our mind. It wouldn't depend on every moment of consciousness. It wouldn't depend on, all these other phenomena, the objects of the mind and so forth. So this is an answer to Rika's question, therefore. It sometimes sounds that nothing really exists on the gross level, but maybe on the subtle level. Alai Rinpoche told us last week that there is a subtle body we get into when dying, and that brings us to the next life. Is there a subtle level basis that goes on? No, there is a subtle body, yes. The subtle body is the subtle energy in our body. For instance, that's called the energy body we have. Then when we die, also there's the in-between, the pardo state. You basically take on right away like a pardo body, which is subtle again, It's not just the energy, but it also appears in a certain way. It has a certain appearance, but it's very subtle, like a rainbow body, they say, which doesn't have the gross aspect, like being as tangible as a normal body like we have. So that is accepted, but it's not saying that there's a subtler level where things exist inherently. No, inherently existent means totally independent. And that's impossible. But inherent in something, that's okay. Inherent. So even in English, you can use it that way. It's inherent in water to be wet. It's natural to water to be wet. But there's no subtler level as such. It's really just saying an absolute inherence. That's impossible.
Yeah. So this word intrinsically,
Intrinsically, it's the same.
Synonym with inherent.
Yeah, it's a synonym. Yeah, they mean the same. Yeah, exactly. But intrinsically existent, inherently existent, of course, from a Buddhist point of view, that's impossible. Then Bernd asks, can you take mind to mind as an object if it has a solidity which, like partless particles, would need a specific building block that does not have any kind of dimension which can be taken to mind? Please edit your messages. Can you take mind to mind as object if it has a solidity which, like partless particles, would need a specific building block?
Could you observe partless particles? Is that what he's saying?
Can you take mind to mind? So can you apprehend a mind? It has no solidity, which, like partless particles, would need a specific building block that has not have any kind of dimension, which I don't know, understand this.
I often don't understand.
No, I don't understand it. Ben, you have to edit your messages.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Put them through AI.
it's very difficult to understand. And he has really great ideas. I know he does. And when I think about it long enough, but please try to reformulate it. Ben, please try to.
Conceptualize the partless particle that could exist.
I mean, he's talking about taking mind to mind. So taking the mind itself. So that doesn't have solidity.
Remember, we had that question if Shittamatra accepts that mind has also parts or not.
Yeah, mind's parts on. Oh, is that? Oh, maybe it relates to that. Oh.
If you remove one need, it makes a sense.
Pardon? Can you reformulate it, Tommy? Can you read it to me?
Can you take to mind? Can you take a mind to mind as an object if it has a solidity, which this solidity needs partless particles as a specific building block, but that does not have any kind of specific dimension that can be taken to mind. Dimension can always be divided into parts.
Very good. So Tomer is just said, can you take mind to mind if it has a solidity, some kind of solidity that would be like partless particles that need a specific building block, but does not have any kind of dimensions, because dimensions could be divided into parts, right? You said but has not any kind of dimension. You can take the mind to mind, but that's very difficult, first of all. Very hard, because we're not trained to taking something to mind. We're not used to it. It's as simple as that, right? We're used to taking to mind, first of all, visual objects. Okay. And then it's harder to take to mind, take to mind smell. You can easily remember your breakfast, but the smell? Do you really remember? I mean, it's not as clear. Okay. So having said that, mind is even more difficult, has no solidity. It's made of endless moments in time. Sure, you can take it to mind, yes. Doesn't have any dimensions. Yeah, it's very difficult. He's definitely right. It doesn't have building blocks as such. It's only made of moments. So the building blocks would be like moments in time. Has no dimensions, but it has parts, those moments in time. And it's just really difficult. But it's a matter of getting used to it again and again. Like watch your own mind. Usually when you watch your own mind, you're aware of your thoughts. You're aware of that's the wrong way of saying it. You're aware of the objects, right? When you watch your own mind, You're aware of the objects appearing, at least this much. And so you start there. Okay, so you just watch your own mind as you're trying to meditate, which shows you're not meditating because you're watching your mind doing whatever it does. But it's like a train of thoughts, they say, right? It's like every compartment is different, every object is different. So you become more aware of the objects first. Oh, I'm thinking about breakfast, I'm thinking about the sun, I'm thinking about the blah, 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 and so forth. But you also become aware of perceiving them. And that's already a step further. And then you move on to just that clarity of mind. And that is so difficult. That is so difficult. And yeah, you can, of course. There are lots of meditations described on that, described doing it. So it's possible, but right now it seems impossible just because we're not used to it. Just because we're not used to it. Okay. And then there's this photograph of a horns of a rabbit. Horned rabbit caused by papilloma virus. All right. Okay, then Hans suggests this could lead to a change in the way the horns of a rabbit are used in Buddhist philosophy. Well, but it's because of a virus, so it's not really. Okay. It's an argument against Chittamatra seeing mind as something built from partless. There it is. It's an argument against Chittamatrans seeing mind as something built from partless particles. Okay, that's what he was trying to get at. So I don't know. I have to check myself about the Chittamatrans. Would they say the mind is partless? I suppose they would. But even if you see, on the other hand, they would have to say it's made up of moments in time. So they do have parts, right?
They have to say it has temporal parts.
Has temporal parts, yes. And would they accept that you can subdivide them endlessly? That you would probably have a problem with, like subdividing them endlessly. Possibly. Yeah, I don't know. I'll find out. Okay. Okay, great. Wonderful. Ooh, 6 o'clock. I actually made it. Went through all the discussion. Did you have questions? Sorry, I forgot to ask. Anyone? Like maybe one last question. Started a little late. Sun is out, so you don't have to rush home. Anyone?
I'd like to know where I can read more about the nature of sense faculties. Gönneberg Genzenhammer was asking, where can you read more about the nature of sense faculties? Unfortunately, it's kind of like mentioned every now and then, right? I mean, it doesn't say much more. I remember coming across it again and again. It's internal form. For instance, maybe that would be a good idea. The first volume of Science and Philosophy in the classical Tibetan tradition. There they do talk about sense faculties, and I seem to remember it also mentions its internal form. Yeah, it talks about like what is form, what is a non-compositional factor, what is consciousness. The consciousness is part of the second volume, but in the first volume it specifically talks about these first two categories, and it speaks about the sense faculty as being internal form. I seem to remember. You can easily Google it. Just look for sense faculties. They call them, what is it called in that book?
Sense sources.
Do they call them sense sources or sense faculties? The second volume definitely talks about sense faculties.
Powers. There's 3 different translations always. I get so confused. Sense powers, sense sources, sense faculties.
No, sources is used as a different word altogether. There's a 12, exactly, very good. Yeah, the 12, exactly, very good, very good. Yeah, they're the 12 sources. But the 12 sense, sometimes they use a power and sometimes they use faculty. I like faculty, but they also use dominant faculty. No, they use uncommon empowering. Instead of saying uncommon empowering condition, they use dominant faculty, which I think is a problem because every cause is an empowering cause. Cause and empowering cause are described as, in many texts, as equivalent. Dakyen, it's called Dakyen. Dakyen and cause are usually described as, but dominant, every cause is dominant. Dominant, it seems to imply there are causes that are not dominant, right?
So empowering makes more sense to me. But in this translation, I noticed they use the word dominant condition, no, dominant faculty. No, sorry, empowering, the uncommon empowering condition. Instead of saying uncommon empowering condition, they call it the uncommon dominant condition. And then the question is, why is every cause a dominant cause? While empowering makes sense. Empowering in the sense that it's empowered to give rise to a result. That makes more sense to me. But yeah, sorry, that's a little bit off. It's just a different term for the sense faculties. Yes, they talk about mental faculties and sense faculties, which I think is good. Sometimes they use mental sense faculty. Why mental sense faculty? Just mental faculty. In English, in some older translations, they talk about the sense faculties, what you need on a physical level to give rise to an eye consciousness. And then they say mental sense faculty. Why? Yeah, why like the six senses. But there are no six senses because the sixth is not a sense consciousness. So I think it's very good in that new translations, they use sense faculty. No, mental faculty. That's actually much better. But yeah, anyway, you find it in there. It's really nice source on the sense faculties and so forth, even if you don't read the whole thing. Okay. All right. So next time, we'll continue on page 191. So now you've got material until what page? Page 2000. Not 97, that's a mistake. Yeah, I didn't. First I had 197 and I thought I might as well add 3 more and I forgot to adjust the page numbers. So you've got 2, and you need 5 more at least, 6 more. So until, no, 2 more, only 2 more. 2 more. Not 2 more. 2 more, you need 2 more. You don't need 2 more, you need 2 more. I mean, we have 2 more classes, sorry. So we need about, we got to page 191, right? Maybe you don't need new material. Anyway, okay, let's see. If there's anyone left on Monday, I mean, really the group has shrunk a lot. So is anyone, I know someone not coming. Who's still around? Okay, 2 more. Okay, great. All right. Okay. Yes, I know. Yeah, it depends on. Of course, I know with the rain now. No, it's my own. It's my own fault that I started into the monsoon because of course people can't come. Alan can't come. He's on a bike, and with the rain and stuff, it's very difficult. I went on a little bit too long, but never mind. Okay. All right. So let's dedicate. In the snow-encircled land, you are the source of benefit and bliss. Avalokiteshvara, Denzin Gyatso, please remain in life until samsara ends. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, rise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. May the precious view of emptiness, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. Thank you very much. Wow, I'm tired.